The rain struck the penthouse windows like gunfire, but the real violence was in his voice. "Get out!" Carlo roared, hurling her suitcase onto the cold marble floor. He was the ruthless king of the Chicago underworld, and by midnight he was tossing his own wife into the unforgiving streets. The digital clock on the bedside table read 11:45. Outside, a brutal Midwestern thunderstorm was tearing across Lake Michigan, battering the glass walls of the Barbieri penthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was even more volatile. Bianca Ferraro stood in the center of the vast, minimalist bedroom, pulling her silk robe tighter around her full, curved figure. She had always been a woman of substance, possessing a lush, plus-sized silhouette that defied the typical razor-thin aesthetic of mafia wives. The other bosses in the syndicate whispered about her behind closed doors, underestimating her, assuming she was merely a soft, docile plaything for the Don. But Carlo Barbieri had never treated her that way. To him, her body was a temple, and her mind was a steel trap. He was a man who crushed his enemies without a second thought, yet he kissed the ground she walked on. He was fiercely, dangerously obsessed with her, or at least he had been until 10 minutes ago. "Get out," Carlo repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal, gravelly register. "I want you out of this house before the clock strikes 12, Bianca." He stood by the doorway, a towering, broad-shouldered silhouette against the dim hallway lighting. His custom Italian suit was discarded, his crisp white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark ink of the syndicate tattoos on his chest. His eyes, usually warm like melted dark chocolate when they looked at her, were completely dead. They were the eyes of the monster the rest of the world saw. The eyes of a killer. "Carlo, please," Bianca said, keeping her voice steady, despite the jagged pain ripping through her chest. "What is happening? You come home covered in rain and blood, and you tell me to pack?" "What did I do? You became a liability," he spat, stepping forward to grab the expensive leather suitcase off the bed. He zipped it shut with violent force. "I am running an empire, Bianca. The Barbieri family is expanding. I do not have time to play house with a woman who needs constant protection. I am tired of looking at you. I am tired of this marriage. It is over." The words felt like a physical blow. Bianca staggered back a half step, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. She stared at him, searching for the man who, just yesterday, had spent an hour tracing the curves of her hips, whispering that he would burn the city to ashes before letting anyone touch her. "You are lying," she said, lifting her chin. Her hidden strength had always been her composure. She possessed an analytical, brilliant mind, one that secretly laundered the Barbieri money through complex offshore shell corporations without anyone in the family ever knowing she was the architect. "I know you, Carlo. Something is wrong. Talk to me." "I am done talking," he roared. He grabbed her suitcase and hurled it out the bedroom door. It crashed against the marble floor of the corridor, bursting open and spilling her clothes everywhere. "I want you out. If you are not in the elevator by midnight, I will have my men drag you out by your hair." Bianca flinched. The raw cruelty in his tone was absolute. She looked at his hands and noticed that his knuckles were white. His fists were clenched so tightly that his forearms were trembling. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure agony passed behind his cold eyes, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Do you need me to call the guards to escort you out, you pathetic woman?" Carlo sneered, stepping closer, his imposing frame meant to intimidate her. Tears pricked Bianca's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. If he wanted to play the heartless bastard, She would not give him the satisfaction of breaking down. She drew her shoulders back, her plush figure radiating a quiet, formidable dignity. "Do not bother," she said quietly, her voice laced with ice. "I can find the door myself." She walked past him, forcing herself not to look back. She moved down the long corridor, kneeling quickly to shove her scattered clothes back into the leather bag. Every movement felt like moving through wet cement. Her heart was shattering into a million jagged pieces, but her survival instinct was kicking in. As she reached the private elevator at the end of the foyer, she pushed the call button. The steel doors slid open immediately. She stepped inside with her heavy bag. Just before the doors closed, she looked up. Carlo was standing at the far end of the hall. The sneer was gone. He looked completely devastated, staring at her as if she were oxygen and he was suffocating. His lips moved slightly, forming a silent word just as the steel doors clamped shut, cutting him off from her sight. "I am sorry." The elevator began its rapid descent down the 60 floors of the residential tower. Bianca leaned against the cold metal wall, gasping for air as the tears finally spilled over her cheeks. He had thrown her out. In the middle of the night, during a storm, he had discarded her like trash. But her analytical mind was already spinning. Why now? Why so suddenly? Why were his hands shaking? The digital floor indicator flashed down to the basement parking garage. Ding! The doors opened to the dimly lit concrete expanse. A black SUV was waiting, the engine idling quietly. Standing beside it was Frank, Carlo's most trusted driver and enforcer. Frank looked nervous. He was checking his watch and scanning the shadows of the garage, his hand resting on the bulge under his jacket. "Boss said I am taking you to the private airstrip," Frank said gruffly, opening the rear door for her. "We have a jet waiting. You are going to Switzerland." "Switzerland?" Bianca stopped in her tracks. "Carlo said he was throwing me out. Why would he arrange a jet?" "Get in the car, Mrs. Barbieri," Frank urged, panic bleeding into his tone. "Please, we do not have time." He said, "I have to get you out of the city by midnight." Bianca climbed into the back seat, pulling her suitcase in with her. Frank slammed the door and rushed to the driver's seat, throwing the massive vehicle into gear and speeding out of the parking garage into the torrential downpour. As they drove through the slick, empty streets of downtown Chicago, the puzzle pieces began to snap together in Bianca's mind. Carlo had come home smelling of blood. He had forced a fight. He had pushed her away with unbearable cruelty, knowing it was the only way she would leave without arguing. He was clearing the board, because a war had come to their doorstep. The windshield wipers of the SUV slapped frantically against the heavy rain. Bianca wiped the condensation from the window, looking out at the blurry neon lights of the city. Her sorrow was rapidly melting into a cold, terrifying dread. "Frank," she called out from the back seat. "Who is hitting us tonight?" Frank gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I do not know what you are talking about, ma'am. Boss's orders are just to get you on that plane." "Do not lie to me," Bianca commanded, her voice ringing with sudden authority. She was no fragile trophy wife. She knew the syndicate's operations better than some of the capos. "If Carlo sent me away, it means the penthouse is no longer safe. It means the perimeter is breached." "Who is it?" Frank swallowed hard, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Trent Falcone." The name sent a chill straight down Bianca's spine. Trent Falcone was the ruthless, bloodthirsty head of the New York Syndicate. For months, Trent had been trying to establish a foothold in Chicago, smuggling weapons and narcotics through the ports that Carlo controlled. Carlo had pushed back hard, shutting down Trent's operations. The tension between the two families had been a powder keg waiting for a match. "Trent is in Chicago," Bianca asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Frank nodded grimly. He flew in tonight. Half our capos went silent an hour ago. We think they flipped to Falcone's side. Boss knew they were coming for the tower. He knew if you were there, Trent would use you to break him. He made himself the bait so you could get out. Bianca felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea. Carlo had thrown her out, not because he hated her, but because he was setting a final stand. He intended to die in that penthouse, taking as many of Falcone's men with him as possible, ensuring she was far away and safe. "Turn the car around," Bianca ordered. "I cannot do that, ma'am," Frank replied. "My life is forfeit if I do not put you on that jet." "I said turn it around," Bianca yelled, leaning forward. Before Frank could respond, the dark street ahead was suddenly illuminated by blinding high beams. A heavy armored truck pulled out from an alleyway, blocking the entire intersection. "Hold on!" Frank shouted, slamming on the brakes and spinning the steering wheel. The heavy SUV skidded on the wet asphalt, hydroplaning toward the concrete barrier of an underpass. Just as they came to a halt, a second vehicle, a sleek black sedan, boxed them in from behind. They were trapped beneath the flickering amber lights of the bridge. The ambush was precise, military-like. This was not a random hit. It was Trent Falcone's men. "Stay down," Frank ordered, drawing his weapon. The sound of automatic gunfire shattered the roar of the rain. The reinforced glass of the SUV cracked and spiderwebbed as heavy-caliber bullets slammed into it. Frank fired back through his window, dropping one of the shadowy figures approaching from the front. But there were too many. A sudden spray of bullets pierced the driver's side door, and Frank slumped over the steering wheel, blood blooming across his chest. "Frank!" Bianca screamed, reaching forward, but he was gone. The gunfire stopped. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the sound of boots splashing on the wet pavement. They were closing in. They wanted to take her alive. Trent Falcone would know that holding the beloved wife of Carlo Barbieri was the ultimate leverage. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but Bianca forced herself to breathe. She was plus-sized, but she was not slow, and she was certainly not helpless. Growing up on the tough side of the city before meeting Carlo, she knew how to survive in the dark. She slipped off her heavy coat to allow herself free movement. She reached over the center console, keeping her head down, and pried Frank's spare weapon from his shoulder holster. Her hands were shaking, but she checked the safety and the clip, just as Carlo had taught her on the firing range. She opened the rear passenger door on the side facing the concrete pillar of the underpass. It was tight, but she squeezed her soft, curved frame through the gap, dropping onto the wet asphalt and rolling into the pitch-black shadow of the pillar. She heard a man laughing cruelly as the passenger doors of the SUV were yanked open from the opposite side. "Where is the fat bitch?" a harsh voice rang out. "Boss wants her breathing." "Check the back,"